On a Sunday evening in December of 1928, in a dusty town square in Colombia, thousands of banana workers and their families were waiting. Men, women, and children gathered together after church, hoping to hear that their strike was finally over, that the company had agreed to treat them like human beings. They had been on strike for weeks. They picked bananas for an American corporation called the United Fruit Company, and their demands were modest. Written contracts, to be paid in real money instead of company vouchers, basic dignity. But the company would not negotiate, and so the government sent in the army. As the crowd stood in the square that night, soldiers quietly took up positions on the rooftops of the buildings around them and set up their machine guns. An officer read out a warning, giving the people a few minutes to leave. Almost no one moved. And then the soldiers opened fire into the packed crowd. How many died that night has never been known for certain. The official count was tiny. Other estimates, including one from the United Fruit Company's own representative, ran past 1,000 men, women, and children. Their bodies were carted away in the dark. It became known simply as the Banana Massacre, and it was seared so deeply into the memory of Colombia that, decades later, the great novelist Gabriel Garcia Marquez wove it into his masterpiece, describing the bodies loaded onto trains and dumped into the sea. This is not a story about a joke fruit, that cheerful yellow banana in your kitchen, the cheapest fruit in the shop, the one you slice onto your cereal without a second thought, has a past soaked in politics, in monopoly, and in blood. It is a fruit that has bribed presidents, built empires, and toppled entire governments. And to understand how a simple piece of fruit gained that kind of terrible power, we have to go back thousands of years to a plant that cannot even reproduce on its own. This is the history of the banana. Our story begins in the steaming jungles of Southeast Asia and the islands of New Guinea more than 7,000 years ago. Some of the earliest farmers on Earth, tending one of the oldest known agricultural sites in the world, were already growing bananas in the highland swamps of New Guinea at a time when much of the world was still hunting and gathering. But the wild banana those first farmers knew was nothing like the fruit you eat today. A wild banana is a tough, stubby thing, and if you bit into one, you would get a mouthful of hard, stony seeds, some as big as peppercorns, packed into a small amount of flesh. It was barely worth eating. To turn that seedy wild plant into the soft, sweet, seedless banana we know took a rare and lucky accident of nature. Every so often, a banana plant would produce fruit without proper seeds, a sweet, soft, seedless mutant. In the wild, such a plant would be an evolutionary dead end, because with no seeds, it could never reproduce. But humans saw something wonderful in it. They learned that they could take a cutting, a shoot from the base of the plant, and grow an entirely new banana plant from it, identical to the parent. And so, over thousands of years, people spread these seedless bananas across the tropical world, one cutting at a time. And here is the crucial fact, the one that will haunt this entire story. Because the edible banana has no seeds, it cannot breed the normal way. Every single banana plant is grown from a cutting of another, which means that the bananas you eat are not just similar to one another, they are clones, genetic copies, all descended from the same original plants, stretching back through the centuries. The banana in your hand is, in a very real sense, the same banana that people were eating 1,000 years ago, kept alive only because human beings keep planting it. Remember that. It matters enormously later on. There are other strange truths tucked inside this familiar fruit. The banana plant is not actually a tree at all. It has no wood. It is technically a giant herb, one of the largest flowering herbs on Earth, and its trunk is really a tightly wrapped bundle of leaves. The fruit itself, botanically speaking, is a berry. Bananas grow in big clusters that hang from the plant, and the people who grow them have their own poetic language for them. A whole cluster is called a hand, and each individual banana is called a finger. So the next time you pick up a bunch, you are, in the language of the banana trade, holding a hand of fingers. It is a fitting bit of strangeness for a fruit whose real story is far stranger than almost anyone realizes. From those first gardens, the banana began a slow march across the world. It spread through Southeast Asia and India, where it became woven into culture and religion. It traveled west with traders into the Islamic world, whose merchants and farmers helped carry it across the Middle East and into Africa. In Africa, the banana found a second home. It arrived over 1,000 years ago and thrived, becoming a vital staple food for millions of people. So important that in some regions it became the very heart of the diet. In fact, the word we use, banana, most likely comes to us from West African languages, a sign of how deeply the fruit had taken root on that continent. Then came the age of European exploration. Portuguese sailors encountered the banana in West Africa and carried it to their island colonies in the Atlantic, and from there across the ocean to the Americas, to the very tropical lands where the banana would one day become an empire. For a long time, though, in Europe and North America, the banana remained an exotic curiosity, a rare and strange tropical treat that most people had never even seen. Very few could have guessed that this obscure fruit was about to become one of the most powerful commercial forces in the world. That transformation began in the late 1800s, when American companies realized something extraordinary. With fast steamships and refrigeration and railroads, they could grow bananas cheaply in the tropics of Central America and sell them, ripe and yellow, in the cities of the United States. Bananas were cheap to grow, easy to ship, and people loved them. The demand exploded, and into that opportunity stepped a company that would become one of the most powerful and most feared corporations in the history of the world, the United Fruit Company. The company's roots trace back to a determined American railroad man named Minor Keith. In the 1870s, Keith took over the enormous task of building a railroad across Costa Rica, from the capital down to the Caribbean coast. It was a brutal, deadly project. The jungle was thick, the terrain punishing, and disease was everywhere. By some accounts, around 4,000 workers died building that line, including 3 of Keith's own brothers, most of them killed by malaria and fever in the swamps. To feed his workers and to give his trains something to carry on the return journey, Keith began planting bananas along the tracks, and he soon discovered that the bananas were worth far more than the railroad itself. When the cash-strapped Costa Rican government could no longer pay him, Keith struck a staggering deal. In exchange for sorting out the country's debt, he was handed 800,000 acres of tax-free land, a slice equal to a significant share of the entire nation, along with a 99-year lease on the railroad. A single foreign businessman now effectively owned a piece of a sovereign country. In 1899, Keith merged his operation with a Boston fruit company, and the United Fruit Company was born. Almost at once, it swallowed more than a dozen competitors and seized control of the vast majority of the banana trade into the United States. It built a fleet of refrigerated ships, painted brilliant white to reflect the tropical sun, and it began to expand across Central America, using the same trick again and again. Offer a poor country a railroad, take its land in return. But United Fruit did not just control where bananas came from. It brilliantly engineered where they went and how people felt about them. At a time when a banana could be cheaper than a locally grown apple, the company poured money into advertising, teaching families that the banana was a wholesome, modern, everyday food. It printed recipes. It put bananas on breakfast cereal. Later, it would create one of the most famous mascots in the history of advertising, a smiling, singing cartoon banana in a fruit-topped hat with a catchy jingle that taught people how to ripen and store the fruit at home. The banana went from an exotic novelty to a fixture of the ordinary kitchen table, all through the careful work of a corporation shaping a nation's appetite. The company controlled the banana from the moment it was planted in the tropics to the moment it landed in a child's lunchbox thousands of miles away. To understand the United Fruit Company, you have to understand that it did not simply grow and sell bananas. It swallowed entire countries. Across the nations of Central America, United Fruit bought up enormous stretches of land, often far more than it ever actually farmed. It built the railroads, It ran the ports, it owned the telegraph lines and the shipping fleets. It controlled the flow of money and the ear of every government. In country after country, the company became more powerful than the state itself. People had a nickname for it, El Pulpo, the octopus, because its tentacles reached into everything. And this is where a new and mocking phrase entered the world's vocabulary: Banana Republic. The term was coined by an American writer who used it to describe a fictional Central American country thinly based on Honduras, where he had once hidden from the law. Today, people use the phrase lightly, but it began as something deadly serious. It described a country whose entire economy was built on a single export crop, like bananas, and whose government was effectively owned and operated by the foreign company that controlled that crop. The Banana Republic was not a metaphor, it was a business model, and the people who lived in it paid the price. Life on the plantations was hard and often deadly. The great banana estates were carved out of malarial jungle, and the workers, many of them brought in from the Caribbean islands and beyond, labored long hours in brutal heat for meager pay. They were frequently trapped in company towns, where the corporation owned their housing, owned the store where they bought their food, and even controlled the money they were paid in, sometimes issuing company vouchers instead of real cash. When workers tried to organize, when they dared to ask for better conditions, the company and its friends in government answered with force. Strikes were broken, sometimes violently, which brings us back to that town square in Colombia in 1928. The workers who were massacred that night were striking against the United Fruit Company. They wanted written contracts, fair pay, and the end of a system that trapped them in poverty. And when they refused to back down, the machinery of the state was turned against them, and hundreds were gunned down to keep the bananas flowing north. To the company, it was simply the cost of doing business. To the world, it became a symbol of everything a banana republic truly meant. But the darkest chapter was still to come, and it would end not with a massacre, but with the overthrow of an entire nation's government. The country was Guatemala. For most of its modern history, Guatemala had been a textbook banana republic, dominated by the United Fruit Company, which owned huge swaths of the nation's best land, most of it deliberately left unused. Then, in the 1940s and 50s, something remarkable happened. Guatemala held free elections and began a period of hopeful reform. A man named Jacobo Arbenz was democratically elected president, and he set out to fix the country's most painful problem. A tiny elite and a handful of foreign companies owned nearly all the land, while the majority of people had almost none. Arbenz passed a land reform law. The plan was to take large estates of unused land, pay the owners compensation, and redistribute that idle land to landless peasant families so they could farm and feed themselves. And the single biggest owner of unused land in the entire country was the United Fruit Company. Now here is the detail that reveals everything. When the Guatemalan government offered to buy the company's unused land, it offered to pay a price based on the value the United Fruit Company had itself declared for that land on its own tax forms. In other words, the government offered to pay exactly what the company had claimed the land was worth in order to avoid paying taxes on it. Suddenly, the company insisted the land was worth many times more. They had been caught in their own game, and they were furious. So the United Fruit Company did what it had always done. It reached for its friends in Washington, and its friends in Washington were powerful beyond belief. The Secretary of State of the United States and the head of the Central Intelligence Agency, two brothers, both had deep personal ties to the United Fruit Company. The company launched a brilliant and ruthless public relations campaign to paint the reformist Guatemalan government not as Democrats trying to give land to the poor, but as dangerous communists, a Soviet threat right on America's doorstep. It worked. In 1954, the American government authorized a covert operation to overthrow the democratically elected president of Guatemala. The Central Intelligence Agency trained a small rebel army, backed it with aircraft, and drowned the country in propaganda and psychological warfare until the government cracked. President Arbenz, believing his own army would not defend him, resigned. he was replaced by a military dictator handpicked with American approval. The reforms were reversed, the land was handed back, and Guatemala was plunged into decades of military dictatorship and a brutal civil war that would eventually cost the lives of somewhere around 200,000 people, most of them poor and indigenous. A democratically elected government had been destroyed and a nation sent spiraling into decades of bloodshed, in no small part to protect the profits of a fruit company. The banana had toppled a government. It is one of the starkest examples in all of history of the raw power a single commodity can wield. And yet, for all its might, the banana empire was built on a hidden and fatal weakness. The very thing we talked about at the beginning. The banana is a clone. For most of the great banana era, there was one variety that ruled them all. It was called the Gros Michel, and it was, by all accounts, a wonderful banana. Bigger, sweeter, and hardier than what we eat today, with a thick skin perfect for shipping. The entire global industry, all those plantations, all that power was built on this single type of banana. And because every Gros Michel plant was a clone, every single one shared exactly the same strengths and exactly the same weaknesses. Then came the enemy, a fungus in the soil, a disease that attacked the roots and choked the plant to death from the inside. It was called Panama disease. And because every Gros Michel banana was genetically identical, the fungus tore through the plantations unstoppably. A disease that could kill one plant could kill them all. It spread through the soil and the water and on the tools of the workers, and no matter what the companies tried, they could not stop it. Whole plantations, thousands of acres at a time, withered and died, and the companies simply abandoned the poisoned land and cut fresh plantations out of virgin jungle, only to watch the disease follow them there too. Entire local economies, built entirely on that one banana, collapsed along with the crop. By around 1960, the mighty Gros Michel, the banana that had built empires, was effectively finished as a commercial crop. Wiped from the world's supermarkets by a fungus it had no defense against, the industry was staring at ruin. But it was saved at the last moment by another variety of banana that happened to be resistant to that particular strain of the disease. It was smaller and many said it tasted blander, but it survived the fungus and it could be shipped. It was called the Cavendish. And if you have eaten a banana recently, the Cavendish is almost certainly what you ate. When the old banana died, the world simply swapped in a new one, and most people never even noticed that the fruit in their kitchen had quietly changed forever. But here is the chilling part. The industry learned almost nothing. The Cavendish, just like the Gros Michel before it, is a single clone, planted in vast identical monocultures across the globe. Today, the Cavendish makes up the overwhelming majority of all the bananas traded in the world, all of them essentially genetic copies of one another. And history, as it so often does, is repeating itself. A new strain of the same kind of soil fungus has emerged, one that the Cavendish cannot resist. It is called Tropical Race 4. It has been spreading, country by country, continent by continent, quietly killing Cavendish plantations wherever it lands. There is no cure and no easy escape, because once the fungus is in the soil, it can linger for decades. Scientists have watched it march across Asia, into Africa, and into the Americas, and many of them believe it is only a matter of time before the Cavendish too meets the same fate as the Gros Michel. The banana on your counter may be living on borrowed time, and yet, for now, the banana remains a quiet miracle of the modern world. It is one of the most exported fruits on the planet, and among the most eaten. In wealthy countries, it is often the single cheapest fruit in the entire shop, available every day of the year, perfectly portable in its own natural wrapper, sweet and filling and ready to eat. Billions of people reach for one without a second thought, but that everyday cheapness hides a hard reality. Bananas are still grown mostly in poorer tropical nations, often by workers who earn very little, on plantations that rely on heavy spraying of chemicals to keep the fragile clone alive against a constant tide of pests and disease. The low price you enjoy at the checkout is paid somewhere else, by someone else, and by the land itself. The cheap banana has always carried a hidden cost. So think about the whole journey. A tough, seedy wild fruit in the swamps of New Guinea, transformed by a rare accident into a sweet, seedless clone that could only survive if humans kept planting it. Carried across the world one cutting at a time, until it became a staple for millions, and then a global obsession. And then handed to a corporation so powerful it owned railroads and governments that gunned down its own workers and helped overthrow a democracy, all to keep that cheap yellow fruit flowing onto breakfast tables. A fruit built on monopoly, on exploitation, and on a genetic sameness so fragile that the entire thing has already collapsed once, and may be about to collapse again. The next time you peel a banana, take a real look at it. It is one of the most ordinary objects in your kitchen. It is also one of the most extraordinary and troubling stories in the history of food. A sterile clone with no future of its own, kept alive entirely by us. A fruit that fed the poor and enriched the powerful. A fruit that, quite literally, toppled governments, all wrapped in a soft yellow peel that costs you almost nothing at all. If this story surprised you, subscribe for more deep dives into the hidden histories behind the everyday things all around you. Drop a like if you learned something new, and leave a comment telling me which part of the banana story shocked you the most. There is a lot more history still waiting to be uncovered.